All right, guys, welcome to another presentation. So, if you guys watched my video a couple weeks ago, I did a video on the topic of oops, too far, too fast. I did a video on the topic of all the competitors that have turned pro this year in the division for fit model, right? And so it kind of got me excited because I found I like kind of getting my brain out to share with you guys. And something I've wanted to do for a long time is really break down the idea of what is peak week, right? How is peak week handled? It's this big mystery. It's not this big mystery. Guys, we're going to simplify it. We're going to talk about it. On the screen here, you have me with Dawn, who won the overall at North Americans last year. And guess where I'm going tomorrow morning at like 5 a.m.? Yeah, I'm headed to Pittsburgh for North Americans again. Last year was an amazing event. 4 pro cards last year at North Americans. You know, one pro card is a great weekend, so it was a truly great weekend. But a lot of those weekends are built around the foundation that I've been doing. I've been full-time coaching for 13, 14 years now, and so I've learned a lot of things along the way. I've changed some things, but peak week is certainly something that has evolved over time for me. And we'll talk about how it's evolved. We'll talk about the history of peak week. I'm going to show you some actual examples of peak week plans that I gave to my competitors on the screen, and I'm also going to show you the results of those competitions. I'll talk a little bit about the history of other type of peak week approaches that you might commonly see, and most importantly, what I'd like to hear from you guys right now, if you're listening, is comment below if you've seen any of this stuff or what your thoughts are on peak week. I'd love to just hear your thoughts because I want to share the information. I want to get it out there because I think there's a lot of people that are confused about what peak week is. So yeah, so shout out to Dawn. She's actually in prep right now for her pro show. So let's go. Let's get into it. First things first. Why the hell should you listen to me? This is something that you should ask of everybody, right? Why should you listen to me? Well, over the last, 13, 14 years, I think 2011. So what are we? We're coming up on 14 years, 300 overall titles, more than 100 pro cards, probably closer to 150. I haven't counted in a long time. 6 world champions, and that's like overall world champions at natural pro shows, world championships. So for those that aren't familiar, the Olympia is like the world championships of the IFBB. The world championships for like WMBF is WMBF Worlds. OCB is like the Yorton Cup. So each organization has its Olympia, right? So I've won 6 of those. And then I've also had 8 competitors qualify to go to the Olympia, 8 different qualified. I've also had, I think, 40 IFBB pro wins. And, honestly, sometimes the numbers don't even matter. Last weekend, I was at a little show in Florida, and the big wins for me were I had a first-time competitor. She won her true novice class. She won her master's class. That's the kind of stuff that gets me jazzed up. It's like, I love the coaching. I love getting involved in the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day stuff that makes each competitor be their best. And if you look on the screen here, these are just a few of my favorite memories, right? And coaching goes way back. You look at Lana Dunbar when she turned pro, Brian DaCosta when he won a world championship. Last year you see the picture with Laura Lee. She was actually on stage for the overall. Alexandria won the overall at that show, and then she won her pro card a few weeks later. Daraja here, 4th at the Olympia. Daniela getting her pro card. Stephanie getting her pro card. Paige getting her pro card. And Elena winning an overall title. So these are just some of my favorite memories, and honestly, they're just some of the pictures that I have saved in my folder. But yeah, lots of memories. I could have chosen anything. So what is peak week, guys? What is peak week? And what is it not? I think it's important that we talk about what it's not. So peak week is just obviously it's the week before a competition. And typically, like a peak week protocol for me, if the show is on a Saturday, it starts like the previous Thursday. So it's more like 9 days, right? Depending on how prep is going, we might be doing mock peak weeks where we test the peaking protocol out going into peak week, and that can change some things. But however you want to look at it, it's the last, let's say, 7 to 10 days leading into a competition. You're adjusting the variables to make sure that the athlete looks best on show day, right? They don't look their best on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They look their best when they walk out on that stage and the judges see them. Because the judges don't know anything. They don't know what they weigh. They don't know how much cardio they did. They don't know how they peaked. They don't know anything. They're just judging athlete to athlete. So your job as a coach and as an athlete is to get up on stage looking the best you possibly can. And when that happens, you see Maria Nemeth here, good things happen. This was our peak week for Universe in 2023, where Maria earned her IFBB Pro card after I think she missed her pro card by one spot 5 times. So this was a cool moment. So peak week, I put here on the screen, is a properly conditioned athlete hitting the stage. Muscle is hard and full, and the athlete is not getting softer. It's getting better. It's often months and years of work that lead to moments on stage, right? And you'll notice athletes, as a coach, I notice athletes get nervous because a lot's riding on that one moment. So as a coach, it's great to be there. So this weekend, I've got a lot of athletes hitting the stage at North Americans. So I'm going to be there in person. I'm going to be backstage. I'm going to see them tomorrow morning for training and posing. I'm going to see them tomorrow afternoon for final adjustments to nutrition, which we'll talk about. How does peaking work? I'm going to talk about how I handle peaking for a bodybuilding show. All right. So let's get to the next slide. I think I'm going to just move this screen around here to make sure I can fit it in. So what are the keys to being successful on stage? First and foremost, and I could make a whole presentation about getting stage lean. So comment below if you want to see a video of me explaining the entire process of prep, from start of prep to end of prep, right? And how to get stage lean. But being stage lean is not going to happen in peak week, right? Peak week is not about getting leaner. Yes, I may use some tactics in peak week, like depleting or trying to get a little bit tighter before I fill the athlete out, setting them up, which I'm going to discuss here in a little bit. But the final week of the show, if you're behind on conditioning, and conditioning simply means the level of body fat that you have, well, you probably aren't ready for the show. Peak week is not some magic formula where you throw everything out and you try all this new stuff. My job as a coach is to get my athlete ready ahead of time, be stage lean before the show. And then what I call it is fine tuning the Ferrari, right? You already have the Ferrari ready to go. This athlete looks great every day. You're just adjusting some minor things so that they look the best they possibly can on stage. You want to bring inflammation down. You want to make sure muscles are full. You want to make sure that you're not overeating and softening up the physique. And based on your division, you want to backstage get a little bit of a pump so that you walk out under those lights ready to go. Now, on the screen here, you see Brittany Hamilton, who we did a bunch of pro shows. She got qualified for the Olympia. This was one of our best looks. And then you see John Hansen here, who is a coach for Pro Physique, but also this year we went to Masters Nationals, and he won the overall bodybuilding title for his age category over 60 and got his pro card. So yeah, peaking for different divisions. We're going to talk all about that, but both of them were ready early. Food was going up, cardio was coming down. We'll talk about all those details. I think I'm just going to keep moving my screen around here. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. So what is stage lean? You'll hear this term a lot, so I wanted to explain what it means. It means that you're properly at the body fat level for your division to be successful on stage, okay? It's different from division to division. Now, I cut my teeth as a coach coaching natural bodybuilders. Why? Because I myself was a natural bodybuilder. Natural bodybuilding, the world of natural bodybuilding, they get leaner as a whole at the pro level than any other division. And the reason being is because they typically diet for a little bit longer. They really take their time and make sure they're super lean going into a show. And so if you ever get the opportunity to go to a natural pro show, you will see some of the most gnarly athletes. That type of conditioning, like you see here on Brian DaCosta, is not necessary for something like the bikini division. Now, the bikini division, which you see Lana Dunbar here, who's going to the Bikini Olympia this year. We've qualified for the Olympia twice now. What you see displayed here is her back pose from the Bikini Olympia 3 years ago. And so you see the the shape of the glutes are full, and you see the tie-ins. This was the day before the show. And you see what the judges want to see is full separation. They don't want to see deep cuts in like the hamstrings. They don't want to see deep cuts in the back of the shoulders. So again, understanding what body fat level you have to get to for your division is important, and how to peak the athlete. It's usually going to be a weight that very few people expect, unless you've done multiple preps and then you kind of know where your weight's going to be. Yeah, it's going to be a number that kind of shocks you. I remember my first prep, my coach said, "Oh, you'll probably be 210." I got to 200, but I won. And I was the leanest person in my division, and I won my first ever show in the NPC. I won the bodybuilding, the whole class. So yeah. Um, if you go to an amateur level show, I'd say that less than 1% of athletes are actually stage lean. So if you get stage lean, you are going to stand out. You are going to look incredible. And if you haven't been to a bodybuilding show, you will notice what I'm saying is true. And if you've been, you know, there's usually one at an NPC show, or like a natural show, like an amateur, there's usually one or two good athletes per division, right? In an extreme case, there'll be more. But if once you go up higher levels, like this weekend when I go to NPC Nationals, I'd say 50% or more will be stage lean. And when you get to the pro level, I mean, we're probably talking 75% or more stage lean. So stage lean is getting your body fat to the right level. Getting the body fat off changes how the physique is displayed, and it changes how you can peak. Okay, you can peak much more aggressively with food the less body fat you have. All right, so how to load muscle. So this is bodybuilding, guys. And what we're trying to do is get the muscles as big as we can based on your division, while keeping everything tight, right? So you don't want to load up so much food and water that you spill over and soften up. So how do we load muscle? Well, this is Daraja Hill. Well, Daraja Whitemoyer now. This was her physique when we got, I believe this was when she got fourth at the Olympia. Yeah, this was the final call out. And one of my all-time favorite moments as a coach was seeing her in the final four at the Olympia. So some things to note about the physiology of muscle. It's about 79% water, muscle tissue is, right? And just remember that for later. Carbohydrates store glycogen in the muscle. Okay, so carbohydrates are converted to glycogen in the muscle. And guess what glycogen does? It pulls water into the muscle. So that's why when you hear the term carbohydrate, it's actually hydrating. Sodium is going to help cell volume and blood volume. So if you ever notice, sometimes when you eat a really salty meal, your veins will come out. Like, I don't know how many veins right now. It's late at night. But you'll see some veins kind of popping. So we can utilize that to fill out the muscles, fill out the blood volume. I'll get into that a little bit. And so let's talk about what it takes to fully load muscles. So as you see here, 4 to 5 grams of carbs per pound, right? So if you're looking at, let's just make it easy. If you're looking at a 100-pound athlete, 4 to 500 grams of carbs. Now, how long does it take to get those carbs in? There's actually some research. I put a study here on the screen for you guys. Now, the study was more based around endurance athletes, but they tested this. And it took about 2 days to completely fill glycogen stores. And so that's an important thing to remember too. When I get to the peaking styles, remember that. It took 2 days with a high carbohydrate diet and reducing training intensity to fully load glycogen in an athlete. That means maximizing how much glycogen the muscle fibers can hold. Bam, you want to pop. Just like Daraja is here. Look at her shoulders. They're full and round. Look at her glutes, quads. Everything is full and round, and everything stayed tight. So how did we accomplish that look? We're going to get into that. All right. I keep moving this little screen around. Hopefully that looks good on the video. Okay. So I want to talk about the history of peaking styles. And as a coach, what I get often is people will say, "Hey, this is the approach I took in peak week." So these are the most common peaking approaches that I've seen. Some I've implemented, which we'll talk about. And then this is me on the screen. This is about the fullest I ever got, and it was a big lesson for me. because this was the day after my show. And after the show, I went out and had, you guessed it, a big meal with a lot of sodium, carbs, and fats at a hibachi. You guys have been to hibachi where they cook. Imagine all that food going in. And this, I woke up the next day a pound lighter than I was on stage and looking absolutely peeled. And I did really well the day before. I looked good, but I could have looked better. So let's talk about what we do here. So typical peaking approach. The most common approach I've seen, and the one that I despise the most, not only because it makes the athlete look terrible, it also makes the athlete feel terrible. And you'll often hear things like people passing out, people will start to get muscle spasms. And that is an approach where all week long you're loading water. So sometimes you might have like 3 gallons of water a day for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? You're pulling out carbohydrates. You're only eating like tilapia or some kind of fish and maybe like asparagus, because asparagus makes you urinate more. And then maybe like some almonds, but it's very minimal food. Sodium is removed, okay, which that in itself is very dangerous. Cutting out sodium from your diet can be very dangerous. Um, then what you do is, as you get closer to the show, you maybe do 3 gallons of water all week, and then on like Wednesday or Thursday you do like 1 gallon, and then like Friday you do half a gallon, then on show day you only sip. And what this does is this upregulates the hormones that secrete more water, and then you stop drinking water while those hormones are elevated. So water is a great diuretic, but some coaches will actually add a diuretic at this time. So now you've taken the water out of your body, taken the sodium out of your body, you take a diuretic. This is where it gets really dangerous. So, the low end of the danger here is that your muscles are going to be very flat. Why? Because you've pulled all the water out of your body. You've pulled all the carbs. So your muscles now are 79% water. Well, that water's all gone. So you're not going to be able to get a pump. You've got no blood volume. And it's going to be a very confusing feeling on stage. You're going to be like, what's happening? Why is my physique doing this? Okay. I often hear athletes will pass out. Why? Low blood volume. When you pull the sodium out of your body and pull the water, that's actually the volume of the blood that's pumped around your body. When you lower blood volume, you can get dizzy and it's easy to pass out. I've heard a lot of stories of athletes passing out in the makeup chair, during the tanning, when they stand up too quick. So it can get a little bit dangerous. And if you want to go a little bit further, there are some really aggressive protocols to dehydrate where the heart is a muscle. So if you're having muscle spasms because you're so depleted, you can actually get a heart arrhythmia and risk cardiac arrest. So it's not a good thing. Then you get to the show, you feel completely run down, and once the show is over, what do you want to do? All you want to do is just go house a bunch of food, and that can set you up for failure. So not only do you look your worst, flat muscles, you feel dizzy, but you're extremely hungry after the show. So how do we fix that? Let's talk about it. So the first ever approach I got to peaking from my coach, who was Lane Norton, who was a student of Joe Klemczewski, was called a front load. So what we would do is completely different than this deplete and dehydrate. We would not do any of that. We would not do any type of loading water, cutting sodium, any of that stuff. In fact, the Monday before my show on Saturday would often be my highest carb day of the week. So he would load me up with 400 to 500 carbs on Monday and then taper it down. So if I was at 450 on Monday, maybe 350 on Tuesday, 300 on Wednesday, 250 on Thursday. Now the idea was like we're filling out those stores, okay? And then we're pushing it to the max, and then we're just tapering it back. So we're allowing things to stay full, keeping the muscles full, and tapering into the show. This result was very good for me. I got very full and very tight. In fact, this was the approach I used, and I won my first bodybuilding show. My second bodybuilding show, I also won the overall at a natural show and got my natural pro card. That was in 2008 and 2009. And then again in 2012, I competed as a pro and looked fantastic using this approach. But I have since found a better approach. Okay, so we're going to get into that. So what are the issues with this approach where you front load the carbs and taper down, and then maybe you add some back in at the end? For me, what I found was that you would peak too early. By loading up on carbs on Monday, like Tuesday or Wednesday, I would look my best, and then I would gradually kind of soften up. Whereas I noticed I looked better on like Tuesday, and I couldn't quite repeat that look on show day. And then it was just hard to time. If you think about muscles as a balloon, you're filling out the balloon and then it's slowly getting a little bit flatter. And then you're trying on Friday to add some more carbs in, and you could overdo it or underdo it. But it was always hard to get it quite right. So I wanted to find an approach that was a little more predictable. The other approach that you'll commonly hear is called a rapid backload. This is where you deplete glycogen through training and you go really low carb, maybe even no carb for multiple days, maybe even like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe even Thursday. And then the last 24 hours before the show, you're looking for something called a supercompensation effect, which is basically where there's been research on this in endurance athletes where they were able to overconsume carbohydrates because of the supercompensation effect. So they push so much food in a short amount of time that the body will actually hold on to it. And this actually can work out very well. I've tried it, and I've had a few athletes do it, but I've found that it is less than ideal. It's less than optimal than the approach that I use, and I've tried it multiple times. The results are you're going to be very full. The real issue is the timing of it, okay? Because in some cases, you're trying to take in between 500 and 1,000 grams of carbohydrates in a short amount of time, 24 to 36 hours. Now, for an athlete like myself that's 200 pounds on stage, remember what I said, 4 to 5 grams of carbohydrates per pound. So that means between 800 and 1,000 grams of carbs. There is something between your mouth and your muscles called your digestive system. Trying to get that much carbohydrates in a 24-hour window resulted in not getting a lot of sleep because I had to eat every couple hours. My digestive system not really processing it. And what I find was between myself and my athletes that I've experimented this with, getting the timing right for when you walk out on stage can be difficult. Because if the show starts early, if the show starts late, your body is really fluctuating a lot because you've taken in so much food and water and sodium all at once. But I will say, it can have a great look. It's just, for me, it hasn't been predictable enough. So the approach that I use is here. Let's see. This is called the progressive linear load. Okay, so what problems does this solve? The first problem it solves is that each day of the week, you look a little bit better. Now, for this to work, I have my athletes check in every day during peak week. I've been doing this long enough that it's pretty predictable. I know most people are going to do well, but still a daily check-in is required because you're looking for a few things, okay? But it's very predictable. So if you look on the screen here, on Monday at 150 carb, Tuesday at 190, Wednesday at 230 carb, Thursday at 270. Friday, I call that a swing day, 350 to 400. It might even be more just based on how things are going, but that's it. You see, it's called a linear progressive load because we're loading the carbohydrates in a linear fashion each day. Very predictable on digestive system. And if you look at the last 3 days, you've got 230, 270, that's 600, and then 400. That's 1,000 carbs over 3 days. And we're no longer on those final days training with any type of intensity. So we're not depleting the muscles. So you're still getting that carbohydrate load that you need to maximize the muscles without that strain on the digestive system and without the kind of uncertainty of how quickly your body's going to, assimilate all that. It's a more predictable load. Okay. It's much lower stress on the athlete because each day the athlete is seeing themselves look better and better and better. Okay. Very predictable digestion. And here's the other thing. When you get to your show, the day before the show, if you're eating 400 carb and 60 fat, yeah, you might be a little bit hungry on show day, but you're not starving. You're not struggling. You actually feel great. You feel the best you've felt all prep. This is the most food most people have eaten in prep. So this is just a sample of what it could look like. Obviously, things are going to change based on the size, the weight of the athlete, the metabolism of the athlete, but this is a very common approach. And I'm actually going to show you actual peak week plans that I used on athletes coming up. But I just wanted to give you guys an idea. So now I want you to think of what I said earlier about the muscle being a balloon. So instead of filling it up and it coming back down, or depleting it down to zero. With a rapid backload, you're basically taking everything out of the balloon and then asking it to fill back out in 24 hours. With this approach, you're just gradually filling the balloon out a little bit more each day, very predictably, until it's busting, okay? Until it's right where we want it to be. All right. So let's talk about some of the details, because with peak week, I get a lot of questions like, what foods should you eat? So as a coach, my athletes are using a flexible approach, right? What that means is I don't have everybody on the same meal plan, but I do have them on meal plans. But I find what they do is they eat the foods that they enjoy throughout prep. So if you find something you digest well and it's going well, we're going to keep that. Now in peak week, we're going to eat the same exact foods every day. But when it comes to loading carbohydrates, what we don't want to do is load high fiber carbs. We basically want to load carbohydrates that digest very well. Okay. Sometimes I even use things like sugar. I'll use like cereal, obviously rice and potatoes, but whatever carb source you've been eating in prep, keep that in. Things I don't like to do, you don't want to overdo it on like things that are slow digesting, like typically like oatmeal. Obviously, you don't want to have a large increase in vegetable consumption or anything that's going to ferment or slow digestion. So yeah, sometimes peak week, I'm suggesting we keep the carbs faster digesting. But if you ate it in prep, it's fine to eating peak week. Okay. And this is something that I often hear is like, oh, when should I cut out my artificial sweeteners? When should I cut out like carbonated beverages? Artificial sweeteners, if you're having them every day and they're not affecting your digestion, keep them in. Okay. I like to have the least variables possible changing in peak week. Carbonated beverages, probably have your last one like Thursday night. I would keep the bubbles out of the stomach on Friday and Saturday, but you can keep them in the final couple days. Supplements, keep them in. Okay. Creatine, it's it's already loaded in your muscle cells. You can pull it out or keep it in, whatever you're comfortable with. It's not going to really impact you. And then just make sure your carbs are easy to digest. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure everything's moving through you. You'd be surprised if you haven't done this approach. By the end of the week, you're starving because your metabolism picks up, your hormones for digestion improve, your sleep improves. And so you start to get these metabolic benefits from eating more food, dropping the cardio out, where your metabolism starts to ramp up. And so sometimes I actually have to have my athletes eat like a burger and fries or like something more substantial the night before the show to keep fullness. These are things that we test, of course. And then, yeah, so you'll see some people on the screen here. There's Lana winning the Ben Weider last year to get Olympia qualified. Me and Ari winning the Atlantic Coast Pro. Me and Alex winning the Battle of the Bodies. Kayla's pro card. Nadia's pro card. It's just, I just love looking back at this. Yeah, some of my favorite athletes. So let's talk about the specifics now. How does it look in action? Okay. Now, in action, I'm going to show you 3 athletes. This was one of my favorite days ever as a coach. This weekend, November of 23, I had 2 athletes qualify for the Bikini Olympia, and Brian won the WNBF World Bodybuilding Heavyweight and Overall title to become a world champion. That happened for me on one weekend. So let's talk about how I peak these athletes. So look at Brian here, who is I believe he was around 192 to 195 pounds. He was a heavyweight at the WNBF Worlds. And if you look at his peaking, it's pretty conservative, right? I started on Monday at 200 carbs. Now, the thing with Brian was we didn't really deplete him. And if you don't deplete the muscle, you don't need to slam food into the muscle. So we did 200, 225, 250, 275. And then I'm sure we did 400 the day before the show. And then the day of the show, if I remember correctly, he went on a little bit later in the day. So we were able to get a couple meals in. So peaking for him is pretty straightforward, right? He had about 1,000 carbs the last 3 days going into the show. He's about 200 pounds. That's about what I said is the proper ratio for loading. And so you'll find that formula to be pretty true for an athlete. Now, how you get those carbs in, that's an approach that, listen, 14 years of experience, I've learned some things, I've made some mistakes. And Dr. Joe is the one that really drove home the idea of this peaking approach, because it's almost so simple. You want it to be more complicated. I get that all the time from athletes. Like, is this is it? We're not doing diuretics. We're not doing HIIT cardio. No, I want the cardio to come down. If you look at the cardio at the beginning of the week, with Brian, it was 45 minutes on Monday, 40 on Tuesday. By Friday, I probably had him doing 15 minutes. And the only reason I have him doing 15 minutes is because I just like to keep people moving, keeps digestion going. The day before the show, I have everybody do like a light little circuit. Why? Because you digest food better when you train. We're not trying to get sore. We're only doing a couple sets. We're just getting some blood in the muscle, but I get to see how my athletes look. Tomorrow, I'm going to North Americans. I'm going to meet my athletes in the gym. I'm going to have eyes on them. I'm going to say, you're flat, you're full. I'm going to see them again later in the day. You're flat, you're full. So I'm going to be paying attention to these variables, but it's not an overcomplicated process. Why? Because we're already ready for the show. Most of these athletes that I'm peaking could just walk into the show on a regular day, right? They could just walk out of the gym, walk on stage, and they'd be good. We're trying to make them a few percent better, okay? Now, on the far right of the screen here, that's Brittany Schulman, who won the Ben Weider, and that's where she got her pro card. She also, this is an image where she got Olympia qualified. So she got Olympia qualified with this peak week plan, right? Now, obviously, she's a lot smaller than Brian, but if you look at her last 3 days, we were at 170 to 190 and 150 and 130. Okay. So we're looking at about 450 to 500 carbohydrates for an athlete that's around what, 115 pounds? Do the math. We're getting pretty close on that formula again, right? So Brittany, if you look, full shoulders, everything's to a point. Core very tight, glutes are full. Why? Because her muscles are full. When your muscles are full, they push out against the skin. They give you a harder look, okay? And on the same day, I was actually at Ariana Brothers' show in Fort Lauderdale. She got Olympia qualified, right? Beating Jasmine Gonzalez at the Atlantic Coast Pro. Yeah, it was a Sunday show. Yeah, just an incredible weekend. And so that's some real world stuff for you guys to see, for you to understand how peak week works. But why does it work this way? It works because the athletes are ready and they were put in position to get ready before the show actually happened. Now, if you'd like to see how a prep would look, like I can draw out like the week to week, how I make adjustments, because this might look easy. You're like, oh, I could do 400 carbs in 15 minutes of cardio. But you didn't see where I had Brian doing 90 minutes of cardio on 120 carbs, or where Brittany was on, 80 carbs and 2 hours of cardio for a couple of weeks. Nobody asks you how you got the look you got. You just got to get the look that's right for stage, right? And that's the job of the coach. Push the athlete hard enough, but make sure you're taking care of them so that they can withstand prep. And if you get them ready early, peaking is a smooth process. And I'm hoping for some good outcomes this weekend so I can do some more videos for you guys. If you enjoy this, please let me know. I'm really enjoying creating these presentations. I would appreciate if you would comment or like or do something, because these take me weeks. I usually start these and I'll do a slide here and a slide there, and I'll look up some data, and I got to grab pictures and grab my Excel spreadsheets and stuff and put everything in here. So these aren't like easy to throw together. So I appreciate the support, guys, and hope you have a great weekend.